what was your evidence that the DEI interventions what was made worse? What interventions and what was your evidence linking them?
Yes, okay, so let me qualify this a little bit. We examined the rhetoric that is common to many DEI interventions.
ChatGPT can do a very good job of that, by the way.
Kind of. The problem is a lot of the materials used in DEI trainings aren't publicly available. So it's actually hard, and we can say they're common to things we had access to, but a lot is not publicly available.
Okay, so where
and that's an important limitation. Well, hold on. That's an important limitation that your listeners, viewers should understand. It's not like we evaluated the effectiveness of the DEI training program instituted by the HR department of the city of Milwaukee. We didn't do that. We took the intellectual ideas from 3 different kinds of sources: anti-racism rhetoric, anti-Islamophobia rhetoric, and anti-caste, the Hindu caste system, anti-caste oppression rhetoric. And there are, for race, we used passages from Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist and from D'Angelo's White Fragility. These books were widely required throughout colleges. There's sometimes, she is paid $40,000 a session to come in and give her training. So we also actually used this sort of large language model, this sort of language network analysis to examine the extent to which this type of rhetoric was common throughout the training materials we had access to, and it was very common.
Yeah, okay, fine. So you use that as a validation.
Yes. You know what, I have on my phone, I have this here. So let me give an example from the race, and this is just a short excerpt. So people would read, say, an anti-racist passage or a control passage. The control passage in these studies, in 2 out of the 3, was about how to grow corn on the farm. It was completely separate. And this is only a short excerpt of a longer passage.
Yeah, okay.
This is the anti-racism. White people raised in Western society are conditioned into a white supremacist worldview. Racism is the norm. It is not unusual.
Okay.
So this went on for a full paragraph. And it was quotes smoothed together with a little writing by us, but of Kendi and D'Angelo.
Yeah,
okay. All right. So they then were presented with a very brief scenario in which a college admissions officer interviews an applicant, and ultimately the applicant is rejected from admission.
Okay.
That's the whole scenario.
Yep.
I mean, the words are slightly different because I'm doing that piece from memory, but that's basically the whole scenario. They were then asked a series of questions assessing how much perceived racism and bias was
the causal factor.
Yeah. What, on the part of the admissions officer. Okay. And what we found is when they got the Kendi D'Angelo essay, they claimed to have seen or observed the admissions officer committing more microaggressions, treating the applicant more unfairly, and that the admissions officer was more biased.
Okay, so I'm going to put on my devil's advocate hat.
Yes.
And I'm going to play Robin D'Angelo, despite wearing this Trump badge. And I'm going to say, well, the effects of institutional racism are so pervasive that they even invaded your experimental material. And the consequence of being exposed to the contents of my writing, speaking as Robin D'Angelo, was that the scales fell from the eyes of your experimental subjects and they were able to perceive the racism that we claimed was there in a manner they couldn't before.
Yes, that is probably what D'Angelo would say. Actually, I can tell you a little bit what Kendi did say because he was asked about it. He did not say that. If someone said that, I would say, well, in our scenario, none of that was evident. You had to read that into the scenario. And that is the point.
How do you know that your own implicit bias didn't stop you from seeing the bias that was there?
Because anyone can look at the scenario. People didn't even have racial information about the admissions officer and the applicant. So you
regard it as highly improbable that what they were reading into the situation, you regard it as highly probable that they were reading into the situation. Okay, let me ask you a couple more technical questions. Okay. How much of this material were they exposed to before they did the evaluation?
About a paragraph.
Oh, just a paragraph.
Just a paragraph.
How soon before the evaluation?
Pretty soon.
Okay. Do you have any idea what the lag time, like if you did a dose response study, so to speak?
Yeah.
Like, is there a decay? Like how permanent are the effects? I know I couldn't expect you to do all that in one study, but it's germane, right?
Yeah. It is kind of. So on the narrow issue of how long do the effects we observed in this study last, we didn't study that.
Right.
So I have no answer to that.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. But given that we observed the effects that we did, the sort of people concocting racism where there was no evidence of it, on the basis of a very minor intervention, this like reading a single paragraph,
right.
It at least raises the possibility that when people are in a culture or organizational context in which this type of rhetoric is pervasive, that they are constantly being exposed or primed to think about race in these terms. And because of the steady diet of this kind of rhetoric, the effects are likely to be more enduring than anything we could possibly observe.
Right, fair enough. Well, I would also say probably you evaluated some of the weaker systemic effects of that kind of rhetoric, because it isn't merely exposure to the rhetoric, it's the fact that post hoc detection of such things as microaggressions, let's say, are radically rewarded by the participants in those ideological systems.
Absolutely.
That'd be an even more, that's a more powerful effect. So you got it with weak exposure fundamentally. Okay, so
and no reward, right? I mean, you're peaking to the sort of social reward.
Exactly.
Yes.
So I would say, and that's the weakness of your intervention demonstrated the power of the rhetoric. Okay, what did Kendi have to say about this?
He described us as racist pseudoscientists.
Oh yeah. Okay, well that pretty much covers the territory. Did he say why, or was that unnecessary? That quote. How are you at wasting money? My sense is that he was particularly good at that. So, university money counterproductively. Yeah.
Well, I think most of his was from actually, what's his name? Jack Dorsey from Twitter. I think gave him $10 million. So at least it wasn't state money, right?
Yeah, right. Okay, well then, we can just let it go. So, okay. You said that produced quite a splash.
Yes.
Including enhanced probability of being on this podcast, for example.
Yes.
So I'd followed your work for a long time before coming across that. So what effect has it had? When was the study published, first of all?
Well,
and is it a sequence? Is it a single study?
No, it's three studies. So it's essentially the same structure for an anti-Islamophobia intervention and an anti-caste oppression. And it's essentially the same results. There's little minor differences, but it's essentially the same pattern of results. They're not published. So these studies I conducted in collaboration with the NCRI. NCRI is the Network Contagion Research Institute. They are a freestanding research institute that started out mostly doing research along the lines of this sort of large language model stuff that you were talking about earlier, analysis of social media and analysis of radicalism, conspiracy theories, hate, sort of groups and individuals mobilizing online. And they've done it with all sorts of stuff. They've done it with COVID conspiracies. They've done it with QAnon. They've done it with Islamophobia. They've done it with anti-Hindu hate. They've done it with anti-Semitism. They were the first group of any kind, as far as I know, in the summer of 2020, the height of the George Floyd social justice protests, which, as you remember, the rhetoric on the left, this is sort of consistent with what you were talking about earlier, about how the reasonable left is in complete denial of the far left. it is literally true that most of the protests were peaceful. Whenever someone would present evidence of some protests not being peaceful at all, like firebombing a police station or capturing downtown Seattle or all sorts of setting creating sort of setting the stage for lawlessness. You would have looting and robberies that weren't really part of the protest, but people were taking advantage of the sort of police-free zones and stuff. When you would talk about that, the response was, "This is all just right."
Of course,
right.
Oh yeah,
right.
I talked to moderate Democrats who told me that Antifa was a figment of the right-wing imagination.
Yes, right.
I thought, but there's something weird about that that's very much worth pointing out. I believe is that we radically underestimate the effect a very small minority of people who are organized can have in destabilizing a society.
That's right.
For example, in the flux of the aftermath of World War I, Russia was chaotic enough so that a very small minority of people, that would be the Bolsheviks, destabilized and captured the entire country. So even if the true radicals on the left are 3%, say, well, 97% of them are peaceful. It's like, fair enough, but you're suffering from the delusion that a demented minority is harmless. And that's,
that's right.
Seriously wrong.
Okay, so enter the NCRI.